Now bring in U.S. Senator Kris from Capitol Hill. He was just in the Middle East just last week. Senator Coons, thank you for the time today.
Rahel, this is yet another tragic story out of Gaza, and it is a cautionary tale, a reminder that as the humanitarian circumstances get worse and worse, people on the edge of starvation are going to assault the trucks that are trying to get in to deliver humanitarian aid. This is a catastrophe, and it is frankly urgent that the IDF and the Israeli government clarify how they are going to help deliver more humanitarian aid into Gaza and what their plans are for a potential assault on Rafah in the coming weeks. When I was in Israel and met with Prime Minister Netanyahu, he made it clear that he had gotten the message from President Biden that they have to do a better job of protecting civilians from harm. I understand the IDF has an important mission in combating Hamas, but Hamas is embedded in the civilian population, in some cases literally under the civilian population in Gaza, and the IDF has an obligation under international law to conduct themselves in a way that minimizes civilian casualties. This tragedy today reminds us how urgent this is.
Senator, how much more difficult does a deal for a temporary ceasefire become after this incident? And I'm reminded of something you said after your recent trip. You said the coming weeks hold the potential to be either the beginnings of a path to peace or an expansion of conflict regionally. And I'm wondering, after this event today, how optimistic are you that the next few weeks are the beginning of a path to peace?
Well, this is in the hands of Hamas and Israel. As you know, they're negotiating through intermediaries. The Qataris, the Egyptians are also helping. Both sides are going to have to be willing to accept releasing more hostages, perhaps than they want to, by Hamas, accepting the release of more Palestinian prisoners in Israeli jails than perhaps the Israeli government wants to. But this is a critical moment. I stand by what I said. In about 10 days, the holy month of Ramadan begins, and throughout this region, incidents like this that are being seen on television screens and on social media around the world will inflame the West Bank, the south of Lebanon, the north of Israel, the Palestinian camps in Jordan, and people concerned about the humanitarian situation here around the world. I urged Prime Minister Netanyahu to recognize that its closest ally, the United States, will continue to stand by Israel, but they must respect their obligation to protect civilians and to facilitate the delivery of humanitarian aid. I think the United States should begin delivering humanitarian aid directly into Gaza by airdrop or sea lift if we are not able to persuade our close ally Israel to open up more routes of access.
Senator, can you give us a sense, based on your conversations with Netanyahu, based on your conversations with the defense minister, what the appetite was, if at all, for a ceasefire? We heard Biden say earlier this week that he was hopeful that it would happen by Monday. He's now saying maybe not as early as Monday. But what was the appetite in those conversations for any sort of temporary ceasefire?
The Prime Minister and Defense Minister made it clear that it is their intention to go into Rafah and to find and eliminate the remaining 4 combat brigades of Hamas that are embedded in Rafah. And so that was their clear determination. They also understood that if there was the possibility of a hostage exchange and a ceasefire for 45 days or more, that would be a positive. But they were also determined to, as the Prime Minister put it, finish the job. In other visits to Lebanon, to Jordan, to Iraq, it was clear to me that a ground assault into Rafah will have very negative consequences for the region. And I think the United States has a critical role to play here in trying to de-escalate the ongoing conflict between Hezbollah and the IDF in the north of Israel, the ongoing conflict in Iraq with Iranian-supported militias, and the ongoing conflict in the Red Sea. At the moment, a forceful response by the Biden administration after Iranian-backed militias killed 3 U.S. Army reservists has given us several weeks of peace in Iraq and the region. But the attacks by Hamas, by Hezbollah, and the Houthis in the region continue. And so a ceasefire would be an absolutely critical opportunity here, a pause to move forward the regional project of peace that is so desperately needed.
Senator, I'm wondering, obviously we had the Michigan primaries earlier this week. You are a co-chair of President Biden's campaign. I'm wondering, Certainly there was a message sent in Michigan from the Arab community there about the White House's stance to the war in Gaza. I'm wondering if you think that we can expect to see a shifting stance from the White House, from President Biden moving forward, especially in light of what happened this morning.
Look, the president has, from the beginning of this conflict in Gaza, made it clear to Israel that the United States will back Israel in its defense, its obligation to protect its citizens, but expects them to allow humanitarian aid, facilitate humanitarian aid into Gaza, and to protect civilians. Roughly 30,000 people have died in Gaza. Maybe 10,000 of them were Hamas fighters, but 20,000 of them were likely innocent women and children, Palestinians. I would expect that President Biden, to the extent he changes direction or tone, it will be because of the circumstances on the ground. Obviously, there was a message sent by voters in Michigan, and I know I'm certainly attuned to that. Many of us who are supporters of our president are attuned to that. This is tearing apart American families, those who have real concerns about the path forward in Gaza, and I think we are doing our very best to balance respect for the hostages who are still being held by Hamas, respect for Israelis whose sense of safety was shattered by the brutal attacks of October 7th, and a deep respect for America's role in the world. We have long been the largest donor to Palestinian assistance through UNRWA. The United States gives more to the care and feeding of Palestinians in camps in Jordan, in Syria, and Israel than any other nation. And this conflict is putting that into sharp relief, the tension between these two long-standing commitments of the United States.
Senator, at what point does U.S. support for this operation in Gaza become untenable?
I think it becomes untenable when Israel demonstrates they are unwilling to listen to us. If they go ahead with a full-scale ground assault into Rafah without making any accommodations for providing for the safety of civilians, for allowing for the relocation of civilians outside the area of combat, I think that would be very difficult for us to sustain and to tolerate. President Biden's been very clear publicly and privately about this.
But, Senator, realistically, what type of safeguards would that look like when you have 1.5 million people in Rafah, in an area where before the war it was 300,000? I mean, it is an extremely densely populated area. I mean, realistically, what would those safeguards look like?
It would look like providing for the relocation of civilians to newly established camps elsewhere within Gaza. It is a monumental task. I find it hard to believe that it would be possible to carry out a military assault into Rafah without needlessly killing thousands, maybe tens of thousands of civilians. That's why I elevated my level of concern about this in my conversation with the Prime Minister and Defense Minister. It's almost undoable.